All right, we'll let people file in again. We had 370 registered, so we'll wait till about 100 people are in before we start going over the logistics. All right, yeah, it looks like it's good to go for now. So yep, thanks for joining us, everyone, for our Wednesday coffee break this time, a little break from our Friday one. Imagine most of you have joined us for one of these before, but if not, this is a Zoom webinar. The webinar portion of it means that your video and your audio is not shared, so you don't have to worry about being heard or seen. The only way you can interact with us is via the chat function on your Zoom webinar dashboard and the Q&A function, which leads me to essentially how we want you to use those two for commentary, any technical questions, side discussion, all that kind of stuff. Use the chat, but if you have a question related to the content for one of the presenters, please use the Q&A function so that we can keep track of those questions and make sure that we get to everybody in due course. You will all be able to see each other's questions, although you can ask them anonymously if you prefer. And you can upvote questions that you find particularly compelling or you want to get an answer to, and you can also add your own commentary to questions. So if you have questions, again, use that Q&A feature. Last but not least, we will have a poll during this webinar about what you guys are doing specifically for your commencement activities. When that comes up, it'll be in a new window. Take your time going through and selecting the options. It's a multiple choice, not a pop quiz. We just want to get some information. We'll share the results of that poll as soon as we close it. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Melanie Gottlieb, your moderator for the day.
Actually, I'll take that, Mike. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's ACRO Coffee Break. I am Tina Deneen, Associate Executive Director of ACRO, and it is my pleasure to be on the line with you today as we navigate the challenges and opportunities presented by the COVID-19 crisis together. Joining me from ACRO today is Dr. Wendy Kilgore, Director of Research and Managing Consultant. We are also very grateful to have industry professionals with us today. I want to thank them for giving us their time while trying to navigate the impact of the coronavirus on their own campuses. We've asked them to give you updates on how they are navigating decision-making regarding commencement ceremonies and degree conferral in the face of this crisis, as well as to share their campus discussions and creative solutions. In addition to Dr. Kilgore, today's presenters are Cody Schmitz, Registrar, Franciscan University of Steubenville, Dr. Hala Abu Araj, Associate Registrar, American University of Beirut, and Dan Wilson, Registrar, Muskingum University. Also joining us to provide suggestions for supporting virtual commencement ceremonies is Mark Homerding, industry expert and longtime ACRO contributor who lectures frequently on commencement ceremonies. Many thanks to each of you for joining us today. And now this slide is an overview of today's format. As always, we are hopeful that our technology will not fail us. This is a large Zoom call, as was mentioned previously, so we chose not to use the video function, and we have muted your mics so that we save on bandwidth. As a reminder, please use the Q&A function on your screen to ask your questions, and we will address as many as time allows during the Q&A section of this webinar. If you would like to direct a question to a particular panelist, please indicate a hashtag and the name of the panelist so that we can more easily direct your question. With so many of you on the call, we may not be able to answer all of your questions, but rest assured, unanswered questions will be collected and added to the ever-growing list of policy questions that our guidance team is working through every day. And some of your questions may resurface as an article in our Connect newsletter, a specific guidance document, or a future coffee break. As you navigate the challenges in the crisis, ACRO is here to connect you with network colleagues to work through challenges together. Mike, if you could forward to the free membership slide. This is an unprecedented time of disruption in our profession, so we have opened our content vaults to the higher education community through our 3 months free membership option. If your membership has lapsed, or if there are others on campus you want to have access to our resources or support you through this transition, we hope you will consider this option. Another resource that you may find useful is the ACRO Guide to Commencement Ceremonies, which is available in print and Kindle formats. Visit the Research and Publications tab at acro.org for more information. To help you navigate the challenges resulting from this pandemic, the ACRO Guidance team developed practice guidelines which can be found on our website. Who is the guidance team? The team includes Executive Director Mike Riley, Deputy Director Melanie Gottlieb, Associate Executive Directors Tom Green and myself, and Director of Research Wendy Kilgore, all of whom are former campus-based professionals with many years of experience. Rounding out the guidance team is Director of Government Relations William Gill. To build our guidance, we are using established ACRO standards and re-envisioning them through the lens of the current COVID-19 crisis, and then consulting with subject matter experts from our board of directors and amongst the membership. While this is not the way that ACRO typically releases new guidance, we are balancing our member development process with the need to immediately address the current crisis so that we can support you as you navigate this new normal. We want to give you guidance that is thoughtful and well-developed, yet timely. We will now have Wendy Kilgore discuss our recent snapshot surveys.
Thank you, Tina. If you participated in these coffee breaks or you've answered one of the surveys, thank you very much. You're probably familiar with the fact that these have gone out and we've had a large number of folks participating. The results are available on the ACRO research page and on the ACRO COVID guidance page. The transfer credit evaluation one, number 3, and official transcript processes will close in about an hour. And so far we have over 500 respondents, and that data will be available and released to the membership through the COVID page, and those signed up to receive ACRO research reports on Friday. So thank you all. Your responses help us shape our guidance to help you and your students. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Cody, who conducted a survey on the Regist L on commencement practices.
Thanks, Wendy. When our senior leadership at our institution began discussing changes to our commencement ceremony in mid-March, I was asked to give my input, and as often many of us do, I turned to my colleagues on the Registel listserv for input since they always have so much valuable insight and perspective to offer. I put together a quick survey, and if I'm being honest, my intention wasn't so much to collect aggregate data as it was to just allow as many folks as possible to respond without filling up everybody's inbox for the afternoon. I thought that there would be some interest in it, but I wasn't expecting the 210 or so responses that we ended up getting. I shared a live link to the survey results so that folks could kind of see in real time what types of decision-making processes were going on at other institutions. And then we also did just a quick follow-up survey, linked in the ACRO Connect article about this topic that was published shortly thereafter. And I think really one of the most interesting things to note here is just how quickly things changed. And I doubt that will be a surprise to anybody given the times we're living in right now. In the first version of the survey, about 60% of institutions were still undecided and were pretty evenly split in considering different options like proceeding as normal, rescheduling, canceling, or holding a virtual ceremony. But by the second version of the survey, that undecided number was all the way down to 12%, and up to 81% had made a final decision not to hold their ceremony as scheduled. And I think that's pretty consistent with the much more comprehensive ACRO snapshot survey that Wendy will say a little bit more about. So I think it really just goes to show that we were all kind of trying to make these decisions at the same time. Many of us were, at that kind of mid-March point, still undecided, and we're looking to our peers and other folks in the field to see what we were, what we were all talking about. And but I think we've now reached a point where many of us have had some decision points.
Thank you, Cody. It is absolutely a moving target for a lot of folks, and still continues to be, especially folks trying to reschedule for another date and seeing how they can go virtual. But we had 608 respond, and again, we have almost half canceling. You can see the data here. They're trying to reschedule. A small percentage, no plans to change. And interestingly, one of those is a big institution which my son is graduating from, who hasn't changed anything yet. But it's definitely a moving target. Next slide, please. We wanted to include with the commencement data in that last survey a little bit about how it's impacting degree posting as well. So you have the ceremony, but you also have the matter of having to post the degrees. Luckily, 79% were saying there were no delays and there were plans to post degrees. And only 75 of that 608 anticipate delays. And you know, this data is now a week old, so it may have improved. There may be fewer people who are expecting delays, but it was good to see that the degrees will still be posted in a timely manner. And now we have, I believe, a poll that we're going to open up to you. Mike, I believe that's next. So we're going to leave this open for a couple of minutes, or a little bit, to see what folks are doing on their campuses. Mike, if you wouldn't mind letting us know how folks are responding, we can decide how long it needs to be open. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. No, people are definitely, they're taking their time, but we've got results coming in. I'd say we still probably want to have it open for at least another minute. We've got about 12% of attendees have voted thus far. And as you can imagine, based on your research results, a pretty good mix of answers here as well.
Yes, Mike, I think it's going to take a while for things to settle down, that's for sure. Probably another month or two before folks decide exactly what they need to do.
And I think we'll leave the poll open for another 30 seconds. We have about 70% of attendees have submitted thus far. All right, 10 seconds. All right. So there are the results right there. There's a lot to digest for sure. And we'll make sure that we share these poll results with you in the post-webinar survey as well.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to scroll down through them. I think everyone has to scroll down independently to see the results. Is that correct?
Sorry, I had muted myself. Yes, that is correct. With the window, you can actually maximize the window, the poll window, to ensure that you can see more of the poll itself, but you still will need to scroll. That's correct.
Now, these practices are the decisions that seem to line up with the other surveys that have been done, and that could be that some of the participants in this webinar are also the participants in Cody's survey. And our survey, it is folks are being very gracious about participating in multiple pollings coming out. So thank you for taking your time to respond to this. And again, as Mike shared, we will post these as part of the slide deck, and it's always good to know what other folks are doing. And now I'll hand it back off to Tina.
Thank you, Wendy. And you're right that things are changing daily. So we really do appreciate everybody's participation. And now to discuss institutional decision-making, we will hear from Cody Schmitz, followed by Dr. Hala Abu-Araj and Dan Wilson.
Thanks, Tina. At Franciscan University, I think it's fair to say that our decision-making process was very strongly informed by our identity as a smaller, primarily residential campus. We have around 2,100 undergraduates on campus, and with that size of university, students do tend to know each other. They know many of their peers, and there's a strong emphasis on community life and developing lifelong relationships. And so from the beginning of this planning process, our senior leadership was very sensitive to the fact that our senior students had left campus for spring break with every intention of coming back and having a couple of more months to say goodbye and finish out their studies, to celebrate with their friends and classmates, and to say their goodbyes. And so all of that really changed for them overnight when the decision was made to transition to online learning for the rest of the semester. For us then, I don't think that canceling was ever really on the table. And even the option of having a virtual ceremony was one that I don't think had much likelihood of proceeding. And that our senior leadership was, again, particularly concerned that these students, or at least as many of them as possible, have an opportunity to be together one last time. This is also our first year with a new president, and I'm not sure about others, but I've observed in the past that a new president tends to develop kind of a special bond with their first graduating class, or sometimes the first freshman class that they get to see all the way through to graduation. So a small factor, but I think that might have been part of it as well. And so we enlisted the help of our student government to reach out to graduating students to try to better understand their wants and their needs regarding commencement, and then to see how many of those wants and needs we felt that we could reasonably meet. And so on April 3rd, we made the decision to reschedule our commencement ceremonies for August 15th this year. There were certainly some voices that expressed some concerns about the potential impact of hosting such a large event close to orientation. I'll plead the Fifth Amendment on whether or not I was one of those voices, but certainly there were some who had some reservations about trying to execute two events of that scope and scale in such a close proximity to each other. As I'm sure is the case at many institutions, many of the same individuals for us are involved in planning and carrying out both of those events, and we don't want either one to suffer from the proximity. But overriding those concerns in the end, though, was the desire to hold the ceremony on a date at which the largest percentage of the graduating class would be able to attend, and to recognize them before the following semester started, to try to avoid any impression that the class of 2020 was an afterthought. And so doing this will likely mean that we'll have to make some changes both to our graduation ceremony and our orientation events as we've traditionally held them. What those are specifically, we don't know yet, but I've been encouraged by how readily folks have jumped in to offer their creativity and their willingness to roll up their sleeves and do really whatever is necessary to make sure that these students are honored appropriately. There's still a great deal of uncertainty. We can't see far enough into the future to know whether or not a large event like this can even be held in August safely. But for the time being, this is our plan, and we'll continue to make adjustments as time goes on and we learn more about what the circumstances will allow.
Thank you, Cody. And Hala?
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. My name is Hala Abu-Araj. I am the Associate Registrar at the American University of Beirut. For those of you who do not know, it is a university located in Beirut in Lebanon, in the Middle East. We have survived a 15-year civil war crisis between 1975 and 1990, where the university continued throughout those years to provide education and learning to the country and to the region. I am glad to join you to discuss this extremely important topic of commencement amidst a COVID-19 pandemic, which is affecting the whole world. The journey began when the American University of Beirut announced that the university campus will be closed to students, faculty, and staff starting March 14. And the semester will be continued using remote teaching and with a skeleton staff to keep the work going. Following this, we started exploring creative ways to get on with the rest of the semester in the middle of the semester. We began exploring different academic policies options, including alternate grading modes, taking into account the best interest of the student. During these unusual times, the university had to think about its students who have left the campus, of students who traveled abroad and will not return physically for the rest of the semester. Of course, keeping academic integrity was the most important thing. AUB leadership has been and still working around the clock to develop contingencies to handle our new reality, i.e. living in the post-COVID-19 world. All this in a dynamic setting amidst rapid changes. Last Wednesday, on April 8th, the university decided on how to proceed with our most labor-intensive and collaborative annual event. I'm talking about the commencement. There were many options available on the table as the commencement ceremony date, which was supposed to take place on June 5th and June 6th, was looking highly improbable. Those options were either delaying the commencement until later in 2020 when the situation resolves, or stacking the commencement of 2020 together with the commencement of 2021, or doing a virtual event, or a combination. Last Wednesday, the university took the decision to postpone the university's commencement exercises until such time where it will be possible to hold an in-person ceremony. The aim in principle is to hold the event in September, around the start of the fall semester. If stringent pandemic measures still persist by that time, we shall work towards a later date. We have ruled out a virtual commencement with digital participation. The governing bodies responsible for this decision-making included the Board of Deans, the Senate, and the Board of Trustees, which is the highest governing body of the university. So the approval went into many different stages and into many fruitful discussions before reaching a final decision. There were many considerations that influenced this decision-making. First, the need to complete the semester as expected without any delays. Second, consultations with the various community stakeholders, faculty members, students, USFC members took place to have a better understanding of all facets in a way to incorporate all feasible solutions. Third, flex policies whenever possible. For instance, I will give you an example. The thesis defense dates for graduate students were extended. Some students were allowed to get an incomplete grade on their thesis till they finish in the summer without the need to register again the course and pay again the miscellaneous fee. This was also the case for internships and practicum courses. So having said this, the deferral date of degrees will be impacted by a delay of at least between 1 or 2 weeks due to the fact that we have opted for an optional pass, no pass grade for students. We have given students the choice of being graded for their courses at the end of the spring semester, either as letter grades or opting for a binary pass, no pass result for each course without affecting their GPA. That's why the process of issuing grades and hence posting degrees will take longer, especially that it is a new process that requires input from students, from faculty members, from IT. So it is not totally in the hands of the registrar's office. And second, as you know, employees, faculty members, and students are working from home, which adds another additional layer of complication and could lead to delays. One final point that I would like to share with you is the conferral of diplomas and whether a conferral of diplomas will be impacted by COVID-19. Whether diplomas are handed by hand or mailed to students or printed by a third party, the process will be delayed by some weeks because of the lockdown, the unusual mail traffic, and the fact that all printers are closed. This will create an additional delays in the delivery of diplomas. That's why I think that a plan B ought to be created by the various universities. That's all for me, and now I will turn it on to Dan. Thank you.
So hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Dan Wilson. I'm the University Registrar and Director of Institutional Research at Muskingum University. We are a small, relatively small residential campus. We have about 1,400 undergraduates, about 1,000 graduate students who 90% of what they do is actually off campus. Throughout this whole process, we are in a relatively rural part of the state of Ohio where many of our students don't even have access to internet from home. So we've been dealing with a lot of issues with that with our students. We also have around a 50% Pell eligibility, Pell eligible population. So we've been working through a lot of these issues, and our mantra all along has been that we want to give students as many options as possible so that they can pick and choose what works best for them. We decided to do the same thing for commencement. We debated, and as we were preparing for this webinar, people said, what has happened at your institution? And I don't know how it's been at yours, but we changed our mind about 7 times in 3 days, trying to figure out how we're going to deal with this. What we've settled on is another shotgun approach, if you will. I think I just went on mute. Nope, I'm there. Okay. And so we're having a virtual commencement ceremony that's going to be held pretty much the same time as the normal commencement would be. And the idea is we're going to have some video taken ahead of time. So it's going to be more of a video production than it will have some live elements, but primarily a production where we may even have a few faculty commencing to music, commencing right into their offices where they'll be by themselves, or commencing into their living room in full regalia, just to give the a little bit of humor to what is not a very humorous time. Then we're also going to hold an in-person commencement at some future to be determined date. So for the virtual commencement, we are sending out caps and gowns and diploma covers. We don't typically, we have graduation before grades are due, so or commencement ceremony before grades are due. So students are being asked to take a picture of themselves dressed up in their regalia, holding their diploma cover. And then we're also asking for pictures of their mortarboards and things like that, so we can have some more community interaction during the virtual event. We haven't figured out all of the details, but something of that nature. And then we're actually planning right now. We talked about maybe having an August commencement, but as has been brought up, we're not sure if we're going to be able to have meetings at that point. We're still concerned about whether we're even going to be able to have classes start on time in August. So we talked about maybe having commencement during homecoming, but I think we finally settled after I think it was the 7th decision. I think we decided to hold our commencement at the same time as what would normally be a December recognition ceremony. We don't typically have a full-blown commencement in December, but this year we're planning to do that. Under the assumption that we will be able to actually hold something, a large event in December. We're hoping that that proves true. Let's put it that way. And then as far as the other questions, our diplomas, much as Hala mentioned from the American University of Beirut, we too have offered our students a pass-fail option on their spring courses. So they will have 7 days after their grades are posted to decide whether or not they want to keep the grade as is and receive the GPA impact, whatever that happens to be, or they can choose to switch to pass-fail. Again, giving the students the most options possible, trying to cut down on their stress as much as possible so that they can actually focus on continuing to work in their classes. So that may delay our diplomas a little bit, but it's really not going to be noticeable because we typically weren't able to get diplomas out in a week anyway. We do everything in-house. We do our diploma printing in-house. So I'm expecting a very minimal, if any, impact on when our diplomas go out. And since we already mail them anyway, that, assuming the post office still runs when we get to May, that shouldn't cause a problem either. So again, a multi-pronged approach with a virtual commencement followed up by an in-person, probably in December, but an in-person event whenever we can. So with that, I will turn it over to whoever's next on the list. I can't remember who it was, but.
Thanks, Dan. We're going to have Mark Homerding discuss virtual commencement photography solutions.
Hi, can mic check? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, great, thank you. Thanks, Dan. Actually, your comment was interesting because internally, when I was looking at different commencement ceremonies and just dealing with the basically loss of revenue for my company as all these were canceled or postponed, they fell into a number of different categories. Those that postponed tend to have facilities in which they could host it. They weren't using some other solution like a local arena. And they've been postponing to August or homecoming weekend or December ceremonies. And it's interesting, Dan, that you highlighted that very thought process in your own institution. In terms of virtual ceremonies, there's a couple solutions out there. In full disclosure, I've been working with GradPack to develop one itself. When things started going south for the commencement community, I started working on a solution with a vendor that I'd known for years. And for me, the idea is that you're going to create a slide. You already have some knowledge that you can put on there, the name, the major, and the honors. And that stuff the reason that I worked with this slide thing is because I had been at a Purdue Global graduation in February where they had a hybrid of virtual and live commencement at the same ceremony. So they have overseas, say, folks that can't make it to the ceremony, and they put these slides on there. There's two pieces of data that you have to collect, which is the picture, as Dan said. I like the cap idea, Dan. I think that's a great idea. And then a quote. And so you want to be able to obviously vet both the picture and the quote. And so unlike, say, if you upload a video, that's going to be harder to vet. A picture and a quote are really easy to fly through and make sure everything's okay. There is another, so in addition to the GradPack solution, there are two other companies of which I'm aware that are offering solutions. One is kind of a consortium between StageClip, Marching Order, and Herff Jones. You can find information on their website. And full disclosure, I know folks at each of these places, and I've talked to them, and so they're not as integrated as I thought. Each has their own kind of solution, but they are all working well together, if you will. And then Jostens also has a solution. I don't know anybody there. I've just seen it forwarded to me. They have basically templates that you can download for free, but it's not a solution per se. It's kind of their advice and giving you some free materials. On my LinkedIn page, you can find a kind of a white paper that I posted on this stuff about a week and a half ago. And additionally, I'll have a slide deck that will be available for Melanie to distribute to the listserv later today with some more information on this. And I'm happy if anybody would like to contact me and get some advice. I am more than willing to talk to anybody pro bono on this issue. Thanks. That's all I have, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks to all of you. It's very heartening to hear that everybody's keeping students first in making decisions about commencement, because this is an important occasion for graduates. We're going to now move to the chat function to navigate questions. As a reminder, please enter your questions in the Q&A section tab on your dashboard. And Wendy is going to help us to read and answer those questions.
Thank you, Tina. And everyone else, thank you for your time in describing what your institutions are doing with this commencement ceremonies now moving forward for the foreseeable future, and for discussing the options about how to handle virtual ceremonies. So let's first we have a very specific question for Dan. So the question is, sorry if I missed this, but when is the virtual ceremony taking place? Is it on the same date as the original commencement date?
And the answer to that is, for now, yes, it is on the same time, time and date as the virtual commencement. And to jump at one or two of the other ones, yes, we will be reading graduates' names. They're part of what they're planning on doing is having almost chapters, if you will, of the event, so that they can have all of the different speeches recorded, and students can either watch those or they can skip over them. We're hoping that with Mom in the room, she'll probably want to see the whole thing.
Thank you. And to follow up with that, again, there was some related questions. The first one I'd like to address, because it got 5 thumbs up, is if you publicly announced or are planning to announce a rescheduled in-person ceremony to take place in August or fall or some other date, what are the considerations or concerns about being impacted by continued or reimposed mass gathering restrictions? In other words, how are you dealing with worries over having to cancel and reschedule a second time? If any of our presenters would like to talk about that?
Yeah, I can speak to that since we're one of those that did, we've gone ahead and announced an August date. Certainly those concerns are very real, that there will still be mass gathering restrictions in place. And that might even look a little more likely now than it did a couple of weeks ago when we made that decision. But there were some factors that were working in our favor that Mark alluded to earlier that made it a little bit more safe for us to schedule that, even though there is a certain amount of tentativeness about what might happen. We do host the ceremony in our own facilities, and so it was not a concern as far as having that available. And by some miracle, all of our speakers and musicians and photographers and everyone happened to have that date clear on their calendar. And so it seemed prudent for us to go ahead and schedule it for that date, to lock that in as best we know. And again, yes, there is the possibility that we will have to go back and then revisit this a second time. But given that we had the availability for everyone and we had the facilities, it just made sense for us to go ahead and plan on doing it then.
I would also like to chime in. This is Mark again. Some of my clients have issued questionnaires out to their entire student body. And the most impressive one for me was Oregon State University, where they have a mid-June ceremony, and they had sent out this questionnaire early in April saying, what would you like to do? And the students overwhelmingly voted to postpone it. They didn't even want, they were, I guess, proactively saying, we understand the seriousness. And they've decided on the homecoming weekend, based on student response, your students might be able to help you navigate this question as well, just by crowdsourcing a questionnaire to them.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address that question about how you are, if you publicly announced or thinking to announce your rescheduling date, about the considerations, but if we have to do this again?
This may not be an answer. This is Dan Wilson. We haven't announced the date of the in-person commencement yet publicly, just for that very reason. We're going to aim for December, but we have not announced it.
Thank you, Dan. That actually does add to it. So some are actually saying we're going to delay, possibly announcing it, just so we can see what happens with the whole mass gatherings recommendations. Thank you. We have another, actually I want to go back to the question that we had answered by one of our panelists, but it's addressed to all. For those of you having virtual commencements, will you be reading the graduate names? And if so, how are you breaking it down, i.e. by major, by degree, by academic division? Anyone else want to address that?
Well, I can address it a little bit just in terms of clients that I have. They are usually reading them broken down by just the names in order. And they're using like slides to show as they're reading the names as the slides go through a video that they're creating, and then they're going to post it later on, like say YouTube or on Facebook chat or something like that. That's what I've been hearing so far.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
We have a couple of questions that are related to each other, and so I'll tie them together and open it up for responses. How are you packaging up regalia? If you are, we're sheltering in place, and are you packaging regalia in bags and or graduation materials, so things, celebratory things? Are you doing that, and if so, how? And how are you getting those to the students?
This is Dan Wilson again. We are maintaining social distancing, of course, but we have a process where we can have one of the people who's already going to be on campus as an essential employee. Basically putting these together, we're actually boxing them up. We're boxing up the regalia, matching it with the size and everything the student told us they needed. And I think there are 3 things we're sending out. One of those would be their cap and gown. One is the diploma cover, and there's something else that I can't remember that I think has to do with the whole celebratory aspect of it. But in Ohio, we have, I think, more flexibility than some of the states just because of the way it's all being handled. So as long as we don't get people in a room together, we've just been doing it that way. Maybe we shouldn't, I don't know, but that's what we've done. And then we're hoping we can get those boxes back, the photos back in time to actually do something with it.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to discuss how they're getting any of the regalia or celebratory materials out to students?
This is Hala. Actually, we're at the moment we're not packaging regalia because we do not have a virtual commencement, and the in-person commencement is supposed to take place sometime in September. We still haven't decided on the date yet. We're not doing that yet at the moment.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next question. 5 thumbs up on this one. Has anyone received pressure to graduate students early or late with a different conferral date?
This is Hala again. Actually, let me tell you how the process of graduation is at our university. Normally, there is a faculty vote, then a Senate vote. And once there is a Senate vote on graduating students, then we can confer the degree to students. Sometimes we do receive students who want to graduate early or late because they want to finish a minor, for instance. For those students who want to graduate late, they don't want to graduate in this semester, normally they petition so that we keep in our record that the student wants to complete like a minor or something, and so that we can add his or her name at a later stage. And for those students who want to graduate early also, but there should be a reason. We normally can graduate students early, but there's got to be a reason, and a very genuine one also. That's it.
Thank you, Hala. Anyone else would like to answer that? Okay. Actually, Hala, we actually have a specific question for you. It says not related to graduation. How are you going to handle the issue of students, well, it's actually a conferral of the degree, issue on students on probation currently who need the current grades to improve their GPA? If they opt in for pass-fail, can they do that when or are they given the option given only to graduating students? That's an interesting question for actually everyone. If you have students who are on the bubble and they're going to pass-fail for the spring and they're trying to graduate, if you want to discuss how that's going to impact degree conferral.
Yeah, actually, we have given all students, not just graduating students, all students can opt for an optional pass-fail. For this semester, we will not issue probation probations for students. We will not put students on probation, whether they have opted for a pass-fail or whether they have opted for the normal letter grades. However, if a student was placed on probation, we will evaluate him or her in this semester and clear the probation if it is legit and according to rules and regulations. So I hope I answered this your question.
I'd like to follow up a little bit that, Hala. So specifically, if a student, and I think I'm reading the question this way, if a student is like maybe a 1/10 of a point GPA off for the term and could have had under normal circumstances graduated by bringing their GPAs up with better grades this term, if those students are, that student in particular is now getting all pass fails, how, if any way, is that impacting the ability for them to say, oh, they can graduate, they did earn the GPA they need for the degree? I think that's where folks are going on that question.
Okay. Actually, we have in the registrar's office, we have gathered all students who have a borderline GPA, graduating GPA, the graduating GPA for it's a C in our university, or a 70, and we have gathered all students who have a borderline GPA, and we have informed their faculties, and we have informed those students that you cannot opt for a pass-fail average because you've got to have the 70 graduating average. You cannot graduate without this. So you cannot opt for a PF if you have like a 69.5 or a 69 average for graduation.
Thank you. That very much answers the question. So, and we also have someone who typed in the Q&A that said they must meet the minimum GPA requirements. If they opt for the pass and fail and they don't make the target, they will not be issued a degree. So at your institution, yeah, they are being told that they cannot actually go pass fail because they do need to be able to calculate a GPA to see whether they made it or not. Would anyone else like to? Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting.
There's another issue there, not just for graduating students. We've also got a list of students who are on SAP probation, where they may also have GPA requirements or other completion requirements that they have to deal with. So what we've done, and Hala actually mentioned this, I believe, but we have 7 days after the final grades are posted for them to make these determinations. And that 7 days is for each student to meet with their advisor and go through all of these different issues, find out, is this something that's going to keep me from graduating? Is this something that's going to make me ineligible for satisfactory academic progress for financial aid? It's supposed to be a very, very individualized decision for all students. Now, that said, most of our faculty are, I think, going to be very accommodating, or as accommodating as they can. We don't want this to be a bank error that hurts the student, so to speak. If anything, it's a bank error in the student's favor. Some majors can't use pass-fail. Nursing majors, for example, cannot use pass-fail. Education majors will have some limitations. Engineering majors, any of the external licensed majors may not even be able to use this at all. So it is going to be very much a case-by-case basis for these students, and we're really encouraging them to take the time after the grades are posted to sit down and talk with their advisor. Well, maybe not sit down, but sit down on Teams or something and work through this this whole process.
Thank you, Dan. Would anyone else like to address how they're handling students who are possibly on the bubble for graduating this semester and how you would confer the degrees?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that we're in a very similar situation to what Dan and Hala have already described. So we are giving students that option for pass-fail, but it does require individual advising before that pass-fail option is going to be granted. I would say that in the vast majority of cases, certainly for students who are not looking to graduate this semester, or for students who are not, as Dan mentioned, in one of the programs that might have professional licensure requirements that mandate a letter grade, the default would be that if a student requests the pass-fail, they would get it, and that also similarly, we're sort of assuming that our normal process of academic probation and dismissal will have a certain hiatus, and that there wouldn't be students who that are going to be dismissed if they're borderline because they chose the pass-fail option and they were already in a borderline situation. But very similar to what both Dan and Hala mentioned, for us, if a student is in a situation where their QPA is borderline and we're still requiring the same minimum GPA for graduation, and so that student would be one of the relatively rare cases where we might deny a request to convert to a pass-fail basis. So that's not an opportunity that we would necessarily approve for them because we are still going to require that the GPA requirement is met. Again, for most other students, with the exception of those licensure programs, the assumption is, as Dan said, it's going to be in the student's favor. There would be very little reason for us to deny that request, but for graduates, we're going to make sure that they meet the requirement.
Thank you, Cody. Anyone else like to address that particular aspect? Okay, as you can see, we have, there's definite overlap between the ceremony having to be rescheduled or adjusted and this whole idea of the registrar side and posting of the degrees and meeting the requirements. They tie very strongly together, obviously, and as we're talking through the conversations here. But back more on the sort of commencement part of it, preparing for graduation, we have a question about managing virtual graduation fairs. And that may be a terminology that some institutions use, but it's really about the process. I think the question is about how, if people are working from home and other modes of that are different than normal, how are you clearing these students? How are you working with the bursar and the registrar and other folks to make sure that they are actually cleared for graduation and for participation in the commencement ceremony?
This is Dan Wilson. We are switching from a what we would call a graduation fair or something very I don't remember what to call it. But anyway, yeah, where the students walk into a room and they walk around and they talk to everybody. We've actually turned that around, and rather than requiring the student to go around and get checked off, we're having the offices contact the students via email or via Teams. We use Office 365. We went live with it about 1.5 years ago. So we've got that for our video and document communications with students. And so instead of having the student check to see if they are, we're having each of the offices check each student. Now we can do that because we've got a relatively small number of students. We will have somewhere around 300 students graduate, commence. About 240 of them will actually be graduating in May. About 60 of them graduated back in December. So we're just turning it around, and instead of making the students run around the circle, we're having the circle run around them, I guess.
That's a good way to put it, have the circle run around them. Would anyone else like to address how they're checking folks out, making sure they're cleared for graduation? All right. We have a couple other questions that have been going back and forth about folks asking more about the pass-fail information and who's doing what, and if students are allowed to have the choices. And there's been some chatter going back and forth about folks giving some examples on how that's done. I can say that we do have a lot of data on that, about 600 responses to one of our surveys. And we also have some guidance on it as well on our website. So rather than diving into something that takes us a little bit off topic, definitely refer you back to the COVID resources page, and you can see a lot of examples how institutions are doing the grading for pass-fail, whether it's a student choice or faculty choice or otherwise. And have some folks asking more about virtual graduations, but in the interest of time, because it's 11:54, I want to be mindful and hand this, thank you all for your questions and for our presenters for responding to them. And we will address those that are remaining in a different format. I want to hand this back over to Tina.
Thank you, Wendy. We've really appreciated the engagement from everyone. And we assure you that we will take any unanswered questions back to the guidance team for advice. Or if you have other questions, feel free to pass those along to us and we will answer those for you as well. ACRO is listening and we are here to help. And for those of you who need much more specific and tailored guidance, Acro Consulting has marshaled expertise to offer heavily discounted express consulting sessions to support your unique challenges with seasoned expertise and actionable recommendations. So contact consulting@acro.org for more information. And lastly, save the dates for our upcoming coffee breaks. The topic for April 17th is keeping students on track for graduation in crisis situations. And on April 22nd, we will focus on graduate and professional school issues. So thanks to everyone for participating today. Good luck and stay safe.